They were silent for years, now they're rising. China's protests are back, and this time, it's different.
A new wave of heavy tariffs from the United States, some as high as 245%, targeting Chinese goods, has sent shockwaves through China's economy. Countless export businesses have been thrown into disarray, facing sudden drops in orders, stalled production, and severe cash flow disruptions. Within this collapsing chain, the first to bear the brunt have been the workers, many of whom have gone unpaid for months. When they could no longer endure the mounting pressure, they rose up. What began as isolated protests has now evolved into a broad wave of resistance, spreading from factories and hotels to even government offices across the country. From April 9th to 10th in Fuxing, Fujian Province, workers at Xingtuang Company also launched a mass strike. They had not been paid for 8 months and had lost access to social insurance benefits. Despite the serious situation, the company provided no official response, leaving the workers in the dark. At the same time, on the 10th of the month, workers at Huike Precision Industrial Course Ltd. in Shenzhen went on strike, protesting the company's decision to relocate its factory without offering any compensation. This was far from an isolated incident. Earlier, from March 31st to April 4th, around 200 employees of the 4-star Grand Mercure Oriental Ginza Hotel in Shenzhen occupied the hotel lobby. They were demanding 3 months' worth of unpaid wages and protesting the unilateral termination of their contracts following the hotel's change in ownership. Their chants, "Oriental Ginza, give us back our sweat and tears," echoed through the building. During the protest, the hotel management remained silent. Instead of engaging with the workers, they cut electricity to the dormitories, locked the cafeteria, and quietly erased all related posts and mentions from social media platforms. In Chengdu, Sichuan Province, more than 100 users of a financial app gathered in front of the headquarters of Modern Financial Holding to demand answers. They were frustrated with ongoing transaction freezes and the company's failure to process fund transfers. When police arrived, clashes broke out, leading to several arrests. The cash flow crisis among third-party payment companies has triggered widespread panic among small business owners, many of whom now face financial ruin. In Wuhan's Huangpi district, Hubei province, yet another protest erupted, this time led by hundreds of female workers at the Chenlong Electronics factory. Their demands were straightforward. They wanted the company to pay their overdue wages and to contribute properly to their social insurance as required by law. During the demonstration, tensions escalated when several women were reportedly manhandled by the police, intensifying public outrage. On the 8th of the month, hundreds of desperate victims gathered at the residential committee's headquarters, demanding their money back. But this was no longer about earning interest. They pleaded merely for the return of what they had spent a lifetime saving. Their anger and grief were not just about financial loss, but also about betrayal by a system they believed was meant to protect them. Further south, in Wenzhou, Zhejiang Province, workers at Shengshu Motorcycle Company went on strike after enduring extended delays in wage payments. This company is just one of countless small and medium-sized businesses now collapsing under the combined pressure of declining exports and skyrocketing operating costs. Effects amplified by a wave of punishing tariffs from abroad. That same evening, April 8th, hundreds of workers at the SAC Volkswagen factory in Nanjing, Jiangsu Province walked off the job in protest. The company had announced it was relocating the factory, but offered no compensation or relocation support to the workers, many of whom had built their livelihoods around the plant. In the eastern province of Shandong, yet another scandal has left thousands devastated. In Linyi City's Dongmuzhuang residential area, the local residents' committee launched what appeared to be an investment scheme, promising unusually high returns. Lured in by these promises, thousands of citizens poured in their life savings, only to be met with financial ruin when the scheme collapsed under the weight of its own unsustainable promises. More than 10,000 people lost everything, from factories to marketplaces, hotel lobbies to residential complexes, workers to elderly savers. An unmistakable chorus of frustration and defiance is growing louder across China. The people are demanding answers, action, and justice. For many, this is not just about money anymore. They have been pushed to the edge by a brutal convergence of economic crisis, rigid government controls, and a chilling silence from the authorities. But this time, the people are no longer staying silent. Li Mingkai didn't ask for much. All he wanted was to earn enough money to support his child. For that simple dream, he worked the night shift, 12 hours a day, for 26 days in a row, at BYD, China's largest electric vehicle manufacturer. He lived in silence in a damp, cramped rented room. His meals consisted of cold lunch boxes and lukewarm tea. He didn't dare to rest. He didn't dare to leave early. Each day blurred into the next, a cycle of exhaustion and survival. Then one night, as the rest of the factory kept humming, Li collapsed, unnoticed, unheard. His lifeless body was only discovered 3 days later. No one came knocking. No alarm was raised. No media outlet reported his death. Not a single company representative shed a tear, or even acknowledged the loss. His passing didn't warrant a name in the headlines. It didn't spark a safety review. It didn't even make a ripple. But Li didn't die from a crash or malfunction. He died from the electric vehicle itself. More precisely, from the brutal system that builds them. He was consumed by the very machine he helped create, not as a victim of an accident, but as fuel for an industrial engine that grinds through human life with terrifying efficiency. BYD offered his family 200,000 yuan in compensation, roughly $28,000. The payment was processed like a maintenance expense, as if Li were a part that had worn out and needed replacing. No manager visited his family. No public statement bore his name. It was as though he had never existed. And what's most horrifying is that Li's story is not unique. Thousands of workers at BYD and similar factories across China are enduring the same conditions, 10 to 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They eat cold food. They live in moldy, overcrowded dorms. They're allowed to be sick, but only after their shift ends. They're not allowed to be tired, to speak out, to ask questions. To protest is to lose your job. And to lose your job is to lose everything. Within BYD's massive production lines, fainting spells are not uncommon. Workers collapse from exhaustion. Others are docked wages for unexplained reasons or transferred to more punishing positions without warning or recourse. No one asks them how they feel. No one gives them the option to refuse. This is not labor, it is exploitation. And increasingly, those who suffer through it are no longer willing to stay silent. The grief, the injustice, the buried rage, it's all beginning to erupt. BYD, once hailed as a crown jewel of China's electric vehicle revolution, is now under intense scrutiny. Workers have begun to speak out, calling the company what it has become for many a factory of suffering. Allegations of labor abuse, excessive overtime, and inhumane working conditions are mounting. Behind the gleaming EVs and the global green energy headlines lies a darker truth, one built on the backs of overworked, underpaid, and unheard laborers like Li Mingkai. He died in silence, but his death has become part of a growing voice. In recent weeks, a wave of labor unrest has erupted at BYD factories in Wuzhou and Chongqing as workers launched strikes in protest of proposed wage cuts. The electric vehicle giant, China's largest EV manufacturer, is also facing serious accusations of misusing a 1 billion yuan compensation fund that was secured during its acquisition of the company Jabin. Workers claim the money, originally intended to support employees impacted by restructuring, has vanished without explanation. At the heart of the protests are growing frustrations over broken promises, unfair treatment, and the lack of transparency from BYD's leadership. Workers are demanding fair compensation and the right to leave the company voluntarily without penalty or coercion. The strike at the Chongqing facility began on March 31st and escalated rapidly, reaching its peak on April 1st, when more than 1,000 workers gathered outside Building A of the BYD compound. Videos circulated on Chinese social media that day showed scenes of defiant solidarity. Workers holding banners and chanting slogans, demanding that BYD's top management respond publicly and honestly to their concerns. One anonymous worker voiced what many were feeling. "We are not machines. We have families to feed." BYD made us promises, but now they've gone back on their word. No one knows where the compensation fund from the Jabin deal went. We demand a real conversation, not silence. You want me to speak. Then let me say this on behalf of everyone here. Who are you? Can you represent us? If not, bring out Wang Hao now. Tell us who you are, who you speak for, and what authority you hold. In response, a man identified himself as Wang Hao, a site supervisor. Can you speak for BYD? The worker pressed. I cannot represent BYD, Wang Hao replied. Then don't speak. Step aside, came the furious reply. As the demonstration grew more intense, factory leadership was finally compelled to step in. In an effort to calm tensions, management proposed forming a delegation of 10 worker representatives to negotiate with the company. But the suggestion only deepened the frustration on the ground. One worker shouted from the crowd, "How can just 10 people represent all of us? We don't need a stalling tactic. We need a public fair answer, right here, right now." The workers' refusal to be divided or silenced marks a significant moment. This isn't just about pay cuts, it's about the growing demand for dignity, accountability, and real dialogue in a system that too often treats human beings like cogs in a machine. The unrest at BYD highlights the widening cracks in China's manufacturing model, where productivity is prioritized over people, and promises to workers are too easily broken. The company now finds itself at a crossroads: continue business as usual, or reckon with the human cost of its rapid rise. Many workers agreed that this was merely a delaying tactic by the leadership, designed to ease the mounting tension within the crowd. The situation quickly escalated and grew increasingly serious. In response, local police forces intervened to prevent the incident from spiraling out of control. Numerous police vehicles were deployed near the factory gates, and a special task force established a security perimeter around the protest area. This heightened the pressure on the workers significantly. Some employees privately expressed that they had no intention of clashing with the police. Their hope was that the strike would compel BID to acknowledge the issue at hand and offer a fair solution. However, the strong police presence left many feeling uneasy. They feared that the demonstration could be labeled as a public disturbance, which might justify harsher crackdowns. The strike at BD's factory in Chongqing is still ongoing. The root of the conflict dates back to September 2023, when BID acquired Jabin's factories in Chongqing and Wuzhou in a deal reportedly worth 15.8 billion yuan. According to labor laws, when a company undergoes a major operational change, such as a merger or acquisition, it is required to compensate longtime employees based on a standard formula, the number of years worked, plus an additional month's salary as severance pay. Following the acquisition, BID demanded that existing workers remain with the company for an additional 18 months in order to qualify for severance from Jabin. Those who resigned before completing this period were told they would not receive the compensation. Trusting BID, many workers agreed to continue working under these terms. However, during this time, BID allegedly employed various tactics to pressure employees into signing new labor contracts, which would disqualify them from receiving severance pay altogether. Protesters have revealed that Jabin had once set aside a fund of approximately 180 million USD to support workforce restructuring after the acquisition. However, the whereabouts of this fund remain unknown, and many workers now suspect that BID may have misappropriated the money. This lack of transparency has further fueled their outrage, especially as trust in the company has completely eroded. To make matters worse, there are now rumors that BD plans to sell the factory to LE Precision under the condition that none of the current workforce will be retained. This potential sale has only intensified the strike and deepened the workers' concerns. As of now, BID has not released any official statement addressing the ongoing protests. In recent months, numerous labor strikes across China have been met with forceful crackdowns, while the presence of independent labor unions remains virtually non-existent. This lack of organizational support has prompted a growing sense of unity among workers, who are increasingly joining forces to defend their rights. Many observers have accused the Chinese government of working in tandem with corporations to suppress workers' rights and stifle dissent. Beyond the ongoing unrest at BAD's factory in Chongqing, similar tensions have erupted at BAD's facility in Wuzhou, Jiangsu province. On the 28th and 29th of month, more than 1,000 workers gathered in protest, expressing outrage over what they described as the company's broken promises that, when left unfulfilled, led to a sharp decline in their incomes. Much like their counterparts in Chongqing, the workers in Wuzhou had initially placed their trust in BID's assurances. When BID acquired the factory, it pledged that salaries, benefits, and job positions would remain unchanged for at least 18 months. In good faith, many employees agreed to stay on and continue working, forgoing any severance compensation in the hope of long-term job stability. However, less than a year after the acquisition, by May 2024, BID implemented a new policy that reduced working hours to 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. While this appeared to align with labor regulations, the company failed to adjust wages to reflect the reduced hours. As a result, the workers' income dropped drastically, sparking discontent and eventually leading to a multi-day strike initiated by both managerial staff and technical workers. Around the same time, BED began a series of internal reshuffles, which included involuntary reassignments and demotions for many workers. On May 14, 2025, one worker was reportedly detained by local authorities for 5 days after protesting his demotion, an incident that further inflamed frustration and resentment among the workforce. The immediate cause of the current strike at the Wuzhou factory stems from BID's recent decision to cut performance-based bonuses. Workers also reported that the company plans to eliminate a modest yet symbolic 30 yuan birthday subsidy traditionally given to employees. Though small in monetary value, the removal of such benefits was seen by many as another sign of the company's disregard for its workforce. Footage from the protest site shows large groups of workers gathering outside the Wuzhou facility, demanding that BID honor its original commitments. Protesters called for either the full reinstatement of promised salaries and benefits or fair severance packages for those choosing to resign. As tensions escalated, a significant police presence was deployed to the area in an attempt to contain the demonstration and prevent it from spreading. From the earlier wave of strikes in Wuzhou to the current protests in Chongqing, a clear pattern has emerged. Issues such as stagnant wages, reductions in employee benefits, and unfulfilled corporate promises have become flashpoints for conflict. These labor disputes reflect a broader struggle between Chinese workers and companies navigating acquisitions, cost-cutting measures, and a tightening regulatory landscape. With worker frustrations mounting and institutional support lacking, it is likely that further unrest could be on the horizon if no viable resolution is found. Amid the wave of strikes erupting at BED's manufacturing plants, one striking feature is the near-total absence of independent labor unions. In their place, the Chinese government and corporate leaders often work hand-in-hand to suppress workers' rights and crack down on labor unrest. This close alliance has made it increasingly difficult for workers to organize or voice their grievances in a formal, protected manner. As China's post-pandemic economic recovery remains sluggish, job insecurity has risen, and social tensions have begun to mount. The labor market is tightening, wages are stagnating, and workplace conditions are worsening. Many observers anticipate that the Chinese government will take swift and severe action to quash any worker-led protests in their early stages before they have a chance to gain momentum. But BID's controversial labor practices are not limited to China. The company's harsh and exploitative management style has been exported abroad, affecting workers in other countries as well. While some may have expected silence from foreign workers due to language barriers or lack of institutional support, resistance has begun to emerge, often starting from the smallest and most basic of injustices. In Vietnam, bead workers at the company's Phu Tho facility chose not to remain silent. Unlike the subdued atmosphere at many Chinese plants, these Vietnamese workers lifted their heads and took a stand. The trigger poor quality meals, low wages, forced overtime, and the absence of rest breaks. Their protest was not driven by lofty ideals, but by exhaustion, by the sheer physical and emotional toll of enduring such conditions without respite. Their demands were modest and clear: higher wages for night shifts compared to day shifts, nutritious meals, proper rest breaks during working hours, and the elimination of penalties for refusing to work overtime. Above all, they called for an increase in the factory's minimum wage, which was notably lower than that of other manufacturers in the region. Initially, BID responded with rigidity, refusing to concede. However, the situation quickly escalated. The official labor union intervened, media outlets began covering the story, and most importantly, the workers remained united. Their collective strength, combined with growing public scrutiny, left BID with little choice but to comply. In the end, the company was forced to meet all of the workers' demands, raising wages, improving benefits, and even offering an additional month's bonus. But the significance of this victory went far beyond financial gains. For the first time, a Chinese corporation operating abroad had to bow to the will of foreign workers. It marked a turning point, a moment where ordinary factory employees proved that collective resistance could succeed, even against a powerful multinational backed by a foreign government. Elsewhere, the situation has been even more dire. In Brazil, BID faced serious allegations of human rights abuses. Reports emerged that 163 Chinese workers had been brought into the country and subjected to deplorable living conditions. These workers were housed in dormitories where temperatures exceeded 30 degrees Celsius, without mattresses or proper beds. They were given substandard food, forced to work 7 days a week, and were reportedly denied access to their passports. To make matters worse, they received only 40% of their promised salaries. Effectively trapped in a foreign country, they had no means of leaving or seeking help. This scandal has cast a harsh spotlight on BID's global labor practices and raised urgent questions about how multinational corporations can be held accountable when operating across borders. From China to Vietnam to Brazil, a pattern is emerging, one that exposes how BID's aggressive expansion has come at a steep cost to its workforce. But these stories also highlight something else: resistance is rising. Workers are beginning to find their voice, even in the harshest of conditions. And as awareness spreads, the pressure on companies like BID to change their ways will only grow stronger. The investigation revealed deeply troubling conditions, inhumane living environments, blatant violations of labor laws, and in some cases, acts that qualify as transnational human trafficking. The Brazilian government did not hesitate to respond, immediately shutting down the construction site and initiating legal proceedings against all parties involved. What was once perceived as an internal issue within a single company has now escalated into a global alarm bell, raising a critical question: can green technology still be considered clean if it's built on exploitation, tiers, and invisible chains? The United States, in a decisive move, imposed a 100% tariff on all electric vehicles imported from China, a policy that effectively shattered the expansionist dreams of Chinese EV makers, especially BID. This isn't just a tax, it's a geopolitical message. The consequences ripple far beyond BID, threatening the very foundation of China's booming EV industry. Once hailed as a market disruptor, BID now finds itself cornered, its low-cost vehicles no longer competitive in one of its most lucrative markets. In 2024 alone, BID exported around 130,000 electric vehicles to the U.S., making up nearly 10% of the total EV sales in the country. But with the new tariff, the price of a BID vehicle would increase by at least $20,000, placing it out of reach for its target consumers. As a result, forecasts for 2025 project a sharp decline in sales to just 60,000 vehicles, a staggering 50% drop. And this downturn comes at a time when BID is already facing rising production costs, increased transportation expenses, and growing pressure from domestic competitors like Tesla and Rivian. The U.S. didn't stop at tariffs. A full-scale trade investigation is now underway, examining whether BID has benefited from illegal government subsidies in China. If found guilty, BID could face a slew of penalties, reduced production quotas, forced divestments, or even billion-dollar fines. China imposed a 34% tariff on American goods, but the damage was already done. Chinese companies like Baidu, heavily reliant on exports and thin margins, couldn't withstand a prolonged trade war. The escalation battered BID and shook China's global ambitions. With the U.S. market nearly closed and allies expected to follow, China's dream of EV dominance is crumbling. BID still stands, but the vision it carried is fading fast. One worker detained, 1,000 on strike, a nation sanctioned, and a world watching. Electric vehicles aren't the enemy, but when built on exploitation and silence, they become a symbol of systemic failure. The question remains, how many more must suffer for a dream they'll never share? Meanwhile, in Shenzhen, once hailed as Asia's Silicon Valley, survival has replaced ambition. Glittering streets are now lined with street vendors struggling to hold on to their livelihoods, facing harassment and confiscation by urban authorities. Viral videos of these clashes flood Douyin, resonating with millions who see their own struggles reflected: unemployed youth, a shrinking middle class, and disillusioned citizens. Street vendor has become a symbol of economic pain, not just survival. Living costs have surged over 20% in 5 years, while wages barely moved. The gap between rich and poor widens, and street vending, once seen as a last resort, is now a daily reality for many. China's economic miracle faces a critical test. Is this a rough patch or the start of a long decline? The street vendors' silent protests pose the question. The world must decide whether to listen. From above, Shenzhen still looks like a shining symbol of China's economic power, with towering skyscrapers and glowing lights. But behind the glitter, many offices and apartments lie dark and abandoned. On the streets below, crowds push through narrow alleys filled with street vendors, signs of growing hardship. China's GDP, once growing steadily at 6 to 7% annually, dropped to just 3% in 2023, a historic low. For a country once seen as the engine of global growth, this marks a sharp slowdown. One major reason: the collapse of the real estate sector, which once made up over 25% of China's GDP. Giants like Evergrande are now drowning in debt, with millions of unfinished homes and buyers who've lost trust. Abandoned buildings and stalled projects now tell the story of a stalled economy. Consumer confidence has plummeted. In cities like Shenzhen, once busy malls are quiet. Shop/prices, but customers are hesitant, worried about jobs and the future. Saving has replaced spending, hitting industries that rely on domestic consumption. China is now trapped in a cycle. Falling confidence leads to less spending, which slows growth even more. Even the yuan has lost value. The slowdown is no longer just about numbers. It's about a nation losing faith in its own economic miracle. The Chinese yuan, once seen as a rival to the U.S dollar, has dropped to its lowest level in 16 years, making imports more expensive and squeezing domestic consumers and businesses. While a weaker currency usually boosts exports, rising production costs are hurting profits, and wages remain stagnant while prices climb. Young people, especially new graduates, are struggling. Many, despite their degrees, are forced into street vending or gig jobs, as unemployment among youth aged 16 to 24 has surpassed 21%. Their dreams of a stable, white-collar future have been replaced by harsh economic realities and unfulfilled family expectations. Street vendors, once a vibrant part of traditional marketplaces, are now marginalized. Yet they play a vital role in the urban economy. Countries like Thailand, India, and Brazil have shown that with thoughtful policies such as zoning, legal protections, microloans, and training, these informal workers can thrive and contribute significantly to national growth. China's future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: its most vulnerable citizens are paying the price for instability. Supporting street vendors may not only preserve livelihoods, but also offer a path toward a more inclusive and resilient economy. Got thoughts or personal experiences? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you believe more people should hear these voices, share this video with a friend.